The church doors hung crooked on rusted hinges, and Violet Fitzgerald pushed through them with shoulders squared against the December wind that tried to follow her inside. She had walked 17 miles that day through snow that reached her knees in places, her boots worn through at the toes, her dress hem stiff with ice. The church was abandoned. That much was clear from the broken windows, and the dust thick enough to write her name in, but it had 4 walls and most of a roof, which was more than she could say for anywhere else in this God-forsaken stretch of Idaho territory. It was 1878, and she was 22 years old, and she had exactly nothing left in the world except the clothes on her back and a locket around her neck that held a picture of parents she would never see again. She found some old hay bales in what must have been a storage room, probably left behind by whoever used to tend the place before the town dried up. Her fingers were so cold they barely bent as she dragged the bales into the main chapel and arranged them into something resembling a sleeping space. The altar still stood at the front of the room, though the cross that must have hung above it was long gone. She wondered if that made this still a holy place, or if God had left along with the people. Either way, it was warmer than outside, and that would have to be enough. Violet pulled her thin coat tighter and lay down on the hay, curling into herself for warmth. Her stomach ached with hunger, but she had learned to ignore that. The last proper meal she had eaten was 3 days ago in a trading post, where a kind woman had taken pity on her and offered her bread and beans. Before that, she could not remember. The weeks since she had fled her uncle's house had blurred together into an endless stretch of cold and fear and determination to keep moving forward, to get somewhere far enough away that he could never find her again. She closed her eyes and tried not to think about the bruises that still yellowed on her arms, or the way her aunt had turned away when Violet begged her for help. She tried not to think about anything at all except the fact that she was still alive, still breathing, still free. That had to count for something. Sleep came in fits and starts, interrupted by the wind howling through the broken windows and the creaking of old wood settling. She dreamed of warm fires and hot food, and woke to find frost forming on the inside of the walls. By the time pale winter light filtered through the windows, she was shaking so hard her teeth chattered, and she knew she needed to find wood for a fire, or she would not survive another night like this. Violet forced herself to stand, though her legs protested and her head swam with dizziness. She made her way to the back of the church, where she had seen some broken pews the night before. They would burn, and surely God would forgive her for destroying what was already destroyed. She was trying to pull apart a particularly stubborn piece of wood when she heard the sound of a horse outside. Her first instinct was to hide, to run, to disappear before whoever it was could see her. But her body was too cold and too slow, and before she could make it more than a few steps, the church doors creaked open and a man stepped inside. He was tall, with broad shoulders, covered by a heavy sheepskin coat and a hat pulled low against the cold. Snow dusted his shoulders and clung to his dark beard. He stopped when he saw her, his hand instinctively moving toward the gun at his hip before he seemed to register that she was a woman, alone, and clearly no threat to anyone. "Did not expect to find anyone here," he said, his voice a low rumble that echoed slightly in the empty space. Violet straightened, trying to look less desperate than she felt. "I am just passing through. I will be gone by morning." He studied her for a long moment, his eyes taking in her worn dress, her hollow cheeks, the way she swayed slightly on her feet. "You look half frozen. How long have you been here? That is none of your concern." "Fair enough." He glanced around the church, at the hay bales she had arranged, at the broken pew she had been trying to dismantle. "You planning to burn that?" She lifted her chin. "I was planning to try, unless you have some objection." "No objection, just thinking you might have better luck with the woodpile behind the church. Actual firewood, already cut and dried. Previous preacher left it when the town emptied out." Violet blinked, not sure if he was mocking her or genuinely trying to help. I did not see any woodpile. It is buried under snow. I will show you. He turned toward the door, then paused and looked back at her. Name is Owen Zeller. I have a ranch about 5 miles north of here. Come out this way to check on the church every few weeks. Make sure it is still standing. Why do you care if an abandoned church is still standing? He shrugged. My mother cared. She died 2 years ago, made me promise I would keep an eye on the place. Said you never know when someone might need it. Violet wanted to tell him she did not need his help or his charity, but her pride seemed like a foolish thing to cling to when she was this cold and this hungry. She followed him outside into air so frigid it hurt to breathe. He moved to the side of the building and began clearing snow with his gloved hands, revealing a tarp-covered stack of wood underneath. There, he said, pulling back the tarp. Should be enough here to last you a few days if you are careful with it. Thank you, Violet said, the words coming out stiff and awkward. She was not used to kindness from strangers. Owen gathered an armload of wood and carried it back inside, Violet following with her own smaller load. He set the wood down near the altar and pulled out a box of matches from his coat pocket. Within minutes, he had a fire going in the center of the chapel, the smoke rising up toward the broken roof and escaping through the gaps. The heat was immediate and glorious, and Violet could not stop herself from moving closer, holding her hands out toward the flames. She felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She would not cry in front of this stranger, no matter how grateful she felt. When did you last eat? Owen asked. I am fine. That was not what I asked. Violet kept her eyes on the fire. A few days ago, I have been managing. He made a sound that might have been disapproval or sympathy. She could not tell which. Wait here. He left before she could protest, and she heard the sound of his horse moving outside. He returned a few minutes later with a leather saddlebag, from which he produced a cloth-wrapped package. He held it out to her. Bread and dried beef. Take it. I cannot pay you. Did I ask you to pay me? Violet took the package with trembling hands, unwrapping it to find thick slices of bread and several pieces of jerky. Her mouth watered so much it hurt. She forced herself to eat slowly, even though every instinct screamed at her to devour it all at once. Owen settled himself on one of the intact pews and watched her eat, his expression unreadable. You running from something? That is none of your business. Probably not, but if someone is going to come looking for you, I would like to know about it. This is my territory, and I do not appreciate trouble. Violet swallowed a bite of bread. My uncle will not follow me this far. He has a farm in Kansas. He does not have the money or the inclination to chase after me across territories. Why did you run? She met his eyes, saw something there that looked like genuine concern rather than mere curiosity. Because staying would have killed me one way or another. Is that enough of an answer? Owen nodded slowly. It is enough. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Violet finished the food he had given her, feeling almost dizzy with the sudden fullness in her stomach. The warmth of the fire was making her drowsy, and she had to fight to keep her eyes open. You cannot stay here, Owen said finally. Violet stiffened. I told you I would be gone by morning. That is not what I meant. I meant you cannot stay here in this church. It is too cold, even with a fire. Another night or two like this, and you will freeze to death or starve. Whichever comes first. I will manage. I have managed this far. That is a matter of opinion. He stood, brushing dust from his coat. My ranch is 5 miles north. I have a housekeeper who lives in the main house with me, a widow named Mrs. Henderson. She could use some help with the winter work, and we have a spare room that is warmer than this place. You could stay there until spring, earn some money, figure out where you want to go next. Violet stared at him. Why would you offer that to a complete stranger? Because my mother raised me better than to leave a woman to freeze to death in an empty church, and because you look like you could use some help, whether you want to admit it or not. I could be a thief, or worse. Are you? No. Then I guess we will be fine. He moved toward the door, then stopped and looked back at her. I am heading back now. You can come with me or you can stay here. Your choice. But if you stay, take the rest of the food in my saddlebag and keep the fire going. And if you change your mind, head north on the main road. The ranch is called the Double Z. Anyone around here can point you in the right direction. He left before she could respond, and she heard his horse move away through the snow. Violet sat by the fire, her mind racing. Every instinct she had developed over the past weeks told her not to trust anyone, not to put herself in a position where someone could hurt her again. But the rational part of her brain, the part that was not clouded by fear and exhaustion, knew that he was right. She would not survive much longer on her own, not in this cold, not without food or money or shelter. She looked around the empty church, at the makeshift bed she had made from hay bales, at the broken windows that let in the wind. Then she looked at the fire that was already starting to die down, at the limited pile of wood that would only last a few days at most. Violet stood up, wrapping her thin coat around herself. She gathered the saddlebag Owen had left behind, checked to make sure the fire was contained and would burn out safely, and stepped out into the cold morning air. The tracks from his horse were still visible in the snow, heading north. She followed them. The walk to the Double Z Ranch took her nearly 3 hours, her progress slow through the deep snow. Several times she considered turning back, but each time she remembered the warmth of that fire and the taste of real food, and she kept going. By the time she saw the ranch buildings in the distance, the sun was high in the sky, and her feet were so numb she could barely feel them. The ranch was more substantial than she had expected, with a large main house, a barn, and several outbuildings all arranged around a central yard. Smoke rose from the chimney of the main house, and she could see horses in a fenced paddock near the barn. It looked like a working ranch, prosperous and well-maintained. Violet made her way to the front door, her heart pounding. She raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. This was madness. She did not know this man, did not know what he might expect from her in return for his help. But before she could turn away, the door opened, and a middle-aged woman with graying hair and kind eyes looked out at her. "You must be the girl Owen mentioned," the woman said. Come in, you look frozen through." Violet found herself ushered inside into a warm kitchen that smelled of baking bread and coffee. The woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Henderson, sat her down at a large wooden table and immediately poured her a cup of hot coffee. "Owen said he met you at the old church, that you were in a bad way, said you might come here looking for work. Is that right?" Violet wrapped her cold hands around the coffee cup. "He said you might need help with winter work. I can earn my keep. I am a hard worker." Mrs. Henderson studied her with sharp but not unkind eyes. "You look like you have been through something difficult. I will not pry, but I will say this. You are safe here. Owen is a good man, probably the best I have ever known. He will not hurt you or take advantage of you. Neither will I. If you need a place to stay and some honest work, we can provide that." Violet felt something loosen in her chest, some tight knot of fear she had been carrying for weeks. "Thank you. No thanks needed. Now let us get some proper food into you, and then I will show you to your room. You can start work tomorrow, once you have had a chance to rest." The rest of that day passed in a blur of warmth and food and the surreal feeling that maybe, just maybe, her luck had finally turned. Mrs. Henderson showed her to a small but clean room on the second floor of the house with a real bed and blankets and a window that looked out over the snow-covered fields. Violet lay down on the bed, just meaning to rest for a moment, and fell asleep so quickly she did not even remember closing her eyes. She woke to darkness and the sound of voices downstairs. For a moment, panic seized her as she thought her uncle had found her, but then she remembered where she was and forced herself to breathe slowly. She could hear Mrs. Henderson's voice and Owen's deeper rumble, talking about ranch business and supplies that needed to be ordered before the next storm hit. Violet got up and splashed water on her face from the basin on the dresser, then made her way downstairs. Owen and Mrs. Henderson were sitting at the kitchen table, and they both looked up when she entered. "Sleep well?" Owen asked. "Better than I have in weeks. Thank you for this. For all of this." He nodded, his expression neutral. "Mrs. Henderson will show you what needs doing tomorrow. Most of it is indoor work this time of year. Mending, cleaning, helping with meals. We have ranch hands who handle the outdoor work. I can do outdoor work too, if needed. I grew up on a farm. We will see. For now, focus on getting your strength back." He stood, placing his empty coffee cup in the sink. "I will be out early tomorrow checking on the cattle. Mrs. Henderson knows where to find me if you need anything." After he left, Mrs. Henderson set out a plate of cold chicken and bread for Violet, insisting she eat before going back to bed. As Violet ate, the older woman busied herself with cleaning the kitchen, but Violet could feel her watching with careful attention. "You can ask," Violet said finally. "Whatever you want to know." Mrs. Henderson sat down across from her. "I only want to know if you are in danger, if we need to be watching for someone to come looking for you." Violet shook her head. "My uncle and aunt had a farm in Kansas. When my parents died of fever last spring, I went to live with them. My uncle thought that meant he owned me, that he could do whatever he wanted. My aunt looked the other way, so I left. I have been moving west ever since, working when I could find work, sleeping wherever I could find shelter. I ended up in that church because I thought the town might have work, but when I got there, it was abandoned." "And your uncle? Will he come after you?" "He did not even come after me when I left. He was probably glad to have one less mouth to feed. I doubt he even remembers I existed by now." Mrs. Henderson reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Then you can stop running. You can stay here as long as you need to." Violet felt tears threaten again and blinked them back. "I will earn my keep. I promise." "I have no doubt about that." The next morning, Violet woke before dawn and dressed in one of the simple work dresses Mrs. Henderson had lent her. Her own dress had been so worn and dirty that the housekeeper had insisted on throwing it away, promising to help her make new ones from fabric they had stored in the attic. She found Mrs. Henderson already in the kitchen, starting breakfast for the ranch hands who would be coming in from the bunkhouse soon. Violet jumped in to help, and together they prepared eggs, bacon, biscuits, and coffee for the 6 men who worked the ranch. Owen came in with the others, all of them stamping snow from their boots and bringing the cold morning air with them. The ranch hands were polite to Violet, tipping their hats and thanking her for the food, but she noticed they kept their distance, probably warned by Owen not to bother her. Over the following days, Violet fell into a routine. She helped Mrs. Henderson with the cooking and cleaning, mended clothes that had been piling up for months, and even helped with some of the bookkeeping when Owen discovered she could read and write and had a head for numbers. The work was hard but satisfying, and for the first time since her parents died, she felt like she had a purpose beyond simple survival. Owen remained polite but distant, speaking to her only when necessary, treating her like he would any other employee. Violet told herself she was grateful for this, that the last thing she needed was another man trying to control her life. But she could not help noticing things about him. The way he was always the first one up and the last one to bed, working harder than any of his ranch hands. The way he was firm but fair with his employees, never cruel or dismissive. The way he sometimes stood at the window in the evening, looking out at the snow-covered fields with an expression of such loneliness it made her chest ache. Mrs. Henderson noticed her noticing and smiled knowingly but said nothing. The first real conversation Violet had with Owen, beyond basic pleasantries, happened on a Saturday evening in mid-January. Mrs. Henderson had gone to visit a friend in Idaho City, the nearest town with more than a handful of buildings, and Violet was alone in the kitchen cleaning up after supper. Owen came in from the barn, brushing snow from his coat, and found her up to her elbows in dishwater. "Mrs. Henderson gone already?" he asked. "Left about an hour ago." She said she would be back tomorrow afternoon. He nodded, moving to pour himself a cup of coffee from the pot that was always kept warm on the stove. He stood there for a moment, clearly wanting to say something but not sure how to begin. You settling in all right? He asked finally. Yes, everyone has been very kind. More kind than I deserve. Why do you say that? Violet shrugged, focusing on the plate she was washing. I am a stranger who imposed on your hospitality. I have given you no reason to trust me. You have given me no reason not to trust you either, and you have been working hard, earning your keep just like you said you would. That is all that matters. She glanced at him, surprised by the warmth in his voice. Why did you really invite me here? And do not say it was just because your mother would have wanted you to. There are churches and charitable organizations in Idaho City that help people like me. You could have pointed me toward them. Owen was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. You reminded me of someone, he said finally. My sister. She died 5 years ago, ran away from her husband when he started beating her. Made it about 50 miles before she collapsed from exhaustion and cold. A farmer found her, but it was too late. She had been out in the snow too long. Violet set down the plate she was holding, her throat tight. I am sorry. Her name was Sarah. She was brave and stubborn, and too proud to ask for help when she needed it. When I saw you in that church trying to break apart a pew for firewood when there was a whole pile of wood right outside, I thought about Sarah and how she might still be alive if someone had helped her. So I helped you instead. I am not your sister. I know that. But maybe if I can help you, it makes up for the fact that I could not help her. Violet dried her hands on a towel and turned to face him fully. You could not have known what she was going through. You cannot blame yourself for that. I knew her husband was no good. I told her not to marry him, but she would not listen. And when she needed help, she was too afraid to come to me because she thought I would say I told her so. Would you have? No. God, no, I would have killed him myself if I had known what he was doing to her. The intensity in his voice made Violet believe him. She moved to sit at the table, suddenly exhausted. My uncle never beat me, she said quietly. But he made it clear that I was there to serve him however he saw fit. He tried to come into my room one night, drunk and thinking I owed him something. I hit him with a wash basin and ran. I do not know if he was badly hurt or not. I did not stay to find out. Owen sat down across from her. You did the right thing. Running was the right choice. It did not feel right. It felt like cowardice. Staying would have been death or worse. There is nothing cowardly about choosing to survive. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of shared pain hanging between them. Violet realized this was the most honest conversation she had had with anyone since her parents died. There was something about Owen that made her want to trust him, made her feel like maybe she did not have to carry all of her fear and anger alone. Thank you, she said finally, for helping me, for understanding. You do not need to thank me. Just promise me you will stay until spring at least. Give yourself time to figure out where you want to go next. And if you decide you want to stay longer than that, there will always be work here for you. Violet nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Over the following weeks, something shifted between them. Owen began seeking out her company, joining her in the kitchen after supper to talk while she finished the dishes, or asking her opinion on ranch business. Violet found herself looking forward to these conversations, to the way he listened when she spoke like her words actually mattered, to the rare smiles he gave when she said something that amused him. Mrs. Henderson watched all of this with obvious approval, making excuses to leave them alone together and humming cheerfully while she worked. Violet wanted to tell her not to get her hopes up, that she was not looking for romance, and surely Owen was not either, but she kept quiet because a small, secret part of her was starting to hope too. February came with a blizzard that lasted 3 days and left snowdrifts as high as the windows. Everyone was trapped inside, and the ranch hands stayed in the bunkhouse playing cards and telling stories. Violet and Owen spent the days helping Mrs. Henderson with indoor projects and the evenings sitting by the fire in the parlor, talking about everything and nothing. One evening, Owen asked her to tell him about her parents, and she found herself sharing memories she had not spoken aloud since they died. Her father, who could fix anything with his hands and always sang while he worked. Her mother, who grew the most beautiful garden and made the best apple pie in 3 counties. The way they had looked at each other like they were still young and in love even after 20 years of marriage. That is what I want, Violet said softly. What they had. That kind of partnership, that kind of love. I would rather be alone forever than settle for anything less. That is not settling, Owen said. That is knowing your worth. She looked at him, at the firelight dancing across his face, and felt something shift inside her chest. This was dangerous, she realized. She was starting to care for him, starting to imagine a future that included him, and that terrified her more than anything her uncle had ever done. But when Owen reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers, she did not pull away. The blizzard passed and life on the ranch returned to normal, but things between Violet and Owen had changed irrevocably. They were not courting, not officially, but everyone on the ranch could see the way they looked at each other, the way they always seemed to gravitate toward each other when they were in the same room. Mrs. Henderson finally confronted Violet about it one afternoon while they were making bread together in the kitchen. "So when is that man going to stop dancing around his feelings and actually tell you he loves you?" the older woman asked bluntly. Violet nearly dropped the dough she was kneading. "He does not love me. We are just friends." "Oh, honey, I have known Owen since he was a boy, and I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. He is just scared, that is all. After what happened with his sister, and then losing his mother, he's afraid to let himself care for someone again." "I am scared too," Violet admitted. "I barely know how to trust anyone anymore, let alone trust someone enough to fall in love with them." "But you are falling in love with him anyway, are you not?" Violet was quiet for a long moment, her hands stilling in the dough. "Yes," she said finally. "God help me, I am." "Then tell him. Life is too short and too hard to waste time being afraid." But before Violet could work up the courage to say anything, Owen made the decision for both of them. It was a cold evening in late February, and they were sitting on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, bundled in thick coats and blankets. The sky was streaked with pink and gold, and the snow glittered like diamonds in the fading light. "Come home with me," Owen said suddenly. Violet looked at him, confused. "I am at your home. I have been here for months." "No, I mean really come home. Stay here not as an employee, but as my wife, if you will have me." Her heart stopped, then started again at double speed. "Owen, I know it is fast. I know you have every reason to be cautious. But I love you, Violet. I have loved you since the day I found you in that church, trying so hard to be brave when you were scared to death. I love your strength and your stubbornness, and the way you refuse to give up no matter what life throws at you. I love the way you sing while you work when you think no one is listening, and the way you always make sure everyone else has enough to eat before you take anything for yourself. I love you, and I want to build a life with you. Not because you need rescuing, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it anymore." Violet felt tears streaming down her face, but for once they were not tears of sadness or fear. "I love you too." "Ah," she whispered. "I did not think I could, did not think I was capable of trusting anyone enough to love them. But you made me feel safe enough to try. You made me feel like I am worth something more than just what I can do or what I can provide. You made me feel like I matter." Owen cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "You matter more than anything in this world. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Violet felt like she was finally, truly home. They married a month later in the same church where they had first met. Owen and some of his ranch hands had spent weeks repairing the place, fixing the windows and the roof, building new pews to replace the ones that had been broken or burned. The preacher from Idaho City came out to perform the ceremony, and the entire town showed up to celebrate. Mrs. Henderson cried through the whole service, and several of the ranch hands pretended they had something in their eyes. Violet wore a simple white dress that she and Mrs. Henderson had sewn together from fabric that had belonged to Owen's mother, and she carried wildflowers that somehow managed to bloom even in the lingering snow. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Owen kissed her like he was sealing a vow more sacred than the one they had just spoken aloud, and Violet knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. The first months of marriage were an adjustment for both of them. Violet had to learn to share her space with someone again, to trust that Owen would not hurt her, even when they disagreed, to believe that his love was not conditional on her being perfect or obedient. Owen had to learn to open up to someone, to share his fears and worries instead of carrying them alone, to accept that having someone in his life meant risking the pain of potentially losing them. But they worked through it together, learning each other's rhythms and habits, discovering that love was not just about the grand gestures, but about the small, everyday choices to be kind and patient and understanding. They learned that sometimes love meant giving each other space, and sometimes it meant refusing to let the other person pull away when things got hard. Spring came and brought new life to the ranch. The snow melted, revealing green grass and wildflowers. The cattle grew fat on the new growth, and the horses kicked up their heels in the pastures. Violet planted a garden behind the house, growing vegetables and herbs and the same kind of flowers her mother used to grow. She sang while she worked, no longer caring who heard her, and Owen would sometimes stop what he was doing just to watch her, a smile on his face that made her heart skip. In May, Violet discovered she was pregnant. She told Owen one evening after supper, nervous about how he would react. They had not talked about children, and she did not know if he even wanted them. But when she told him, his face lit up with such pure joy that all her fears vanished. He picked her up and spun her around, then set her down carefully like she was made of glass. "We are going to have a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby," she confirmed, laughing. He kissed her, then dropped to his knees and kissed her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. Your mama and I cannot wait to meet you." The pregnancy was not easy. Violet was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep food down, and Owen worried constantly. He insisted she rest more, tried to take on more of the household work himself, and drove Mrs. Henderson to distraction with his hovering. But as the months passed and Violet's belly grew round, she felt stronger and more content than she ever had in her life. She would stand at the window sometimes, watching Owen work with the horses, or ride out to check on the cattle, and marvel at how much her life had changed in less than a year. She had gone from sleeping in an empty church, certain she was going to die alone and forgotten, to this: a home, a husband who loved her, a child on the way. In early December, as snow began to fall again, Violet went into labor. It was long and difficult, and there were moments when she thought she could not do it, when the pain was too much and she wanted to give up. But Owen never left her side, holding her hand and whispering encouragement, and Mrs. Henderson guided her through each contraction with calm authority. Finally, as dawn broke on the second day of labor, their son came into the world with a lusty cry that made everyone in the room laugh with relief. Owen cut the cord with shaking hands, and Mrs. Henderson placed the baby in Violet's arms. "He is perfect," Violet whispered, tears streaming down her face as she looked at the tiny red face, the dark hair, the miniature fingers that wrapped around hers with surprising strength. "He is beautiful," Owen said, his own eyes wet as he touched his son's head with gentle fingers. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months, never quite agreeing on one they both loved. But looking at this perfect child they had created together, Violet suddenly knew. "Thomas," she said, After my father, Thomas Owen Zeller. Owen smiled, blinking back tears. Thomas, I like that. Hello, Thomas. Welcome to the world. Those first weeks with a new baby were exhausting and overwhelming, but Violet had never been happier. Owen was a devoted father, getting up in the night to bring Thomas to her for feedings, changing diapers without complaint, spending hours just holding his son and staring at him with an expression of such love it made Violet's heart ache. Mrs. Henderson helped as much as she could, but she also gave them space to figure things out as a family. The ranch hands took on extra work to give Owen more time at home, and neighbors brought food and gifts and congratulations. As winter settled in around them, the little family cocooned themselves in the warmth of the ranch house. Violet would nurse Thomas by the fire while Owen read aloud from books and newspapers, his voice a soothing background to the crackle of flames and the baby's contented sounds. Sometimes they would talk about the future, about how they wanted to raise their son, about the values they wanted to teach him, and the kind of man they hoped he would become. I want him to be strong but kind, Violet said one evening, Thomas sleeping in her arms. I want him to know how to work hard, but also how to be gentle. I want him to respect women and stand up for people who cannot stand up for themselves. He will be all those things, Owen said, reaching over to stroke Thomas's soft hair. He has you for a mother. How could he be anything else? By the time Thomas was 6 months old, Violet felt like she had finally found her rhythm as a mother. She loved watching him discover the world, the way his face lit up when he saw Owen come in from work, the way he laughed when she sang to him, the way he grabbed at everything within reach with curious fingers. The ranch was prospering under Owen's management, and they were able to hire more hands and expand their operations. Violet took on more of the bookkeeping and correspondence, discovering she had a talent for business that surprised them both. She and Owen made a good team, balancing each other's strengths and supporting each other's weaknesses. On a cold December evening, a year and a half after Violet had first arrived at the ranch, Owen suggested they ride out to the church. Mrs. Henderson agreed to watch Thomas for a few hours, and they bundled up against the cold and rode out together through the snow. The church looked different than it had that first day. The repairs were holding up well, and there was even a new cross above the altar, carved by one of the ranch hands as a wedding gift. But standing inside, Violet could still remember how desperate and afraid she had been that night, how certain she was that no one in the world cared if she lived or died. Thank you for finding me here, she said softly, leaning against Owen's side. He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. Thank you for following me home. I did not have much choice. You are very persuasive. I prefer to think of it as persistent. Violet laughed, then grew serious. Do you ever think about how different things would be if you had not come to check on the church that day? If you had waited even one more day, I might not have survived. I try not to think about that, Owen admitted. But I will say this. I believe my mother was watching over both of us that day. She always said that church was important, that it would help someone when they needed it most. I think she meant you. I wish I could have met her. She would have loved you. She always wanted me to find someone strong and smart, someone who would challenge me and push me to be better. That is exactly what you do. They stood there for a while, holding each other in the quiet church, grateful for the series of small miracles and choices that had brought them together. Then they rode back home through the falling snow, back to their son and their life and their future. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. Thomas grew into a sturdy, cheerful child, with his mother's eyes and his father's stubborn determination. When he was 3, Violet gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after Owen's sister. 2 years after that, another son arrived, whom they named Matthew. The house was always full of noise and laughter and the comfortable chaos of a growing family. Violet continued to help run the ranch, her business sense helping them weather difficult economic times and expand when opportunities arose. Owen taught their children to ride and work with cattle, to understand the land and respect the animals. Together, they built a life that was full and rich and deeply satisfying. Mrs. Henderson stayed on until she passed peacefully in her sleep at the age of 73. They buried her in the little cemetery near the church, and Violet cried like she had lost her own mother. In many ways, she had. Mrs. Henderson had been the first person besides Owen to show her unconditional kindness, to help her learn to trust again. As the children grew older, Violet and Owen would sometimes steal away to the church on quiet evenings, just the two of them. It had become a place of pilgrimage for them, a reminder of where they had started and how far they had come. Sometimes they brought their children and told them the story of how they met, how their mother had been brave enough to survive on her own, and their father had been kind enough to offer help when it was needed most. The church saved me, Violet told them once. It gave me shelter when I had nowhere else to go. But your father saved me too, in a different way. He made me believe I was worth saving. You saved yourself, Mama, Thomas said, old enough now at 15 to understand the weight of what she had survived. Papa just helped. That is what love does, Owen said, pulling Violet close. It helps. It supports. It makes you stronger than you could be alone. When Violet was 35, she and Owen traveled back to Kansas. It was the first time she had been back since running away, and she was nervous about what she would find. But she needed to see her parents' graves, to make peace with the past. Her uncle's farm was abandoned, the buildings falling down and the fields gone to seed. Neighbors told them that her uncle had died of a heart attack 5 years earlier, and her aunt had moved east to live with relatives. No one seemed to remember Violet or that she had ever lived there. They found her parents' graves in a small cemetery on the edge of town. The stones were simple but well maintained, and someone had planted flowers that bloomed bright in the summer sun. Violet knelt between the graves and told her parents about her life, about Owen and the children, about the ranch and the happiness she had found. I did it, she whispered. I survived. I built the life you always wanted for me. I hope you are proud. Owen stood behind her, his hands on her shoulders, and she knew that her parents would have loved him. They would have seen in him what she saw, a good man who treated her as an equal, who respected her strength and supported her dreams, who loved her not for what she could do for him, but simply for who she was. They stayed in Kansas for a week, settling her parents' affairs and making sure their graves would continue to be cared for. Then they went home to Idaho, to their children and their ranch and their life. The years continued to pass. Thomas grew up and married a school teacher from Idaho City, and they built a house on the edge of the ranch property. Sarah became a talented horsewoman and helped train the ranch's horses, eventually breeding a line that became famous throughout the territory. Matthew studied law and became the first lawyer in their family, though he always came home to help with the ranch during busy seasons. Violet and Owen grew older together, their hair turning gray and their faces lining with age. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew deeper and stronger with each passing year. They knew each other so completely, could read each other's moods with a glance, could comfort each other without words. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Owen took Violet back to the church one more time. It was spring, and wildflowers bloomed all around the building. Inside, he had arranged candles that cast a warm glow over everything. 25 years ago, I walked into this church and found the love of my life sitting on a pile of hay, too stubborn to admit she needed help, Owen said, taking her hands in his. 25 years ago, you walked into this church and changed everything, Violet replied. You gave me a reason to stop running. You gave me a home. We gave each other a home. That is what marriage is, I think. Not a place, but a person. You are my home, Violet. You always have been. And you are mine. They renewed their vows there in the church, with no witnesses except God and the memories that haunted the old building. They promised to love each other for whatever time they had left, to continue choosing each other every day, to face whatever challenges came their way together. As they rode back to the ranch that evening, Violet thought about that terrified young woman who had stumbled into an empty church on a cold winter night, certain that she was going to die alone. She thought about how one moment of kindness, one offer of help, one person willing to see her worth had changed everything. Life was strange and unpredictable, full of pain and loss, but also full of unexpected grace. She had learned that sometimes the worst moments led to the best outcomes, that sometimes you had to lose everything before you could find what really mattered. She looked at Owen riding beside her, his profile strong against the setting sun, and felt a wave of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. He had been her salvation, but more than that, he had been her partner in building a life worth living. More years passed, bringing grandchildren and great-grandchildren, bringing the joy of watching their family grow and spread across the territory. The ranch continued to prosper under Thomas's management, with Owen serving as an advisor even after he officially retired. Violet started a small school on the ranch for children whose families lived too far from Idaho City to attend regular school. She taught reading and writing and arithmetic, but also art and music and the importance of kindness. Many of her students were children of ranch workers, some were from neighboring farms, and she never turned anyone away. Owen spent his later years writing down the history of the ranch and their family, wanting to make sure future generations understood where they came from and what their ancestors had overcome. He wrote about his parents and sister, about the early days of the ranch, about meeting Violet in the church and falling in love with her stubborn courage. When Violet was 60, a young woman appeared at the ranch looking for work. Her name was Clara, and she had a haunted look in her eyes that Violet recognized all too well. Without asking questions, Violet offered her food and shelter and honest work, just as Owen had once done for her. Later, when Clara told her story of fleeing an abusive husband, of walking for days with nothing but the clothes on her back, Violet held her while she cried and told her she was safe now. "I know what it is like," Violet said. "I know what it is like to run and be afraid and feel like you have nowhere to turn. But you are here now, and we will help you figure out what comes next." Owen smiled when Violet told him about Clara. "Like mother, like daughter," he said. "What do you mean?" "My mother spent her whole life helping people. Now you are doing the same thing. It is a good legacy." Clara stayed at the ranch for 2 years, healing and gaining strength. When she finally felt ready to move on, she went to Idaho City and opened a boarding house specifically for women who needed a safe place to stay. She never married again, but she built a good life for herself, and she always credited Violet with saving her. Violet and Owen celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, friends, and neighbors. The party took place in the church, which had been fully restored over the years, and now served as a community center for the area. There was music and dancing and so much food that the tables groaned under the weight of it all. As Violet looked around at all the people they had touched over the years, all the lives they had influenced, she felt a deep sense of contentment. This was what mattered, not wealth or fame or power, but love and family and community. Not what you accumulated, but what you gave away. Owen pulled her close as they danced, moving slowly to a gentle waltz. His hair was completely white now, and his movements were not as sure as they once were, but his arms around her still felt like home. 50 years, he murmured. Best 50 years of my life. Mine too, Violet said, resting her head on his shoulder. Thank you for finding me in that church. Thank you for bringing me home. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for taking a chance on a lonely rancher who did not know how lucky he was going to get. They danced until the sun set and the candles were lit, surrounded by love and laughter, and the certainty that they had built something lasting and true. Owen passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 79, with Violet holding his hand. His last words to her were, "I love you," and she whispered the same words back to him through her tears. She mourned him deeply, feeling like half of herself had been torn away. But she also felt gratitude for the life they had shared, for the 54 years they had been given together. Not everyone got that kind of love, that kind of partnership. She had been blessed beyond measure. Violet lived another 8 years after Owen died, staying active on the ranch and in the community until the very end. She taught her great grandchildren to read and told them stories about their great grandfather and the early days of the territory. She continued to help women who came to her looking for safety, and she made sure the church was maintained and available for anyone who needed it. On a cold December night, almost exactly 60 years after she had first stumbled into the empty church, Violet passed away in her sleep. She was 82 years old, surrounded by family, and she died with a smile on her face. They buried her next to Owen on a hillside overlooking the ranch, with a view of the mountains and the valley and everything they had built together. The whole community turned out for the funeral, and person after person stood to tell stories about how Violet had touched their lives, how her kindness and strength had inspired them. Thomas, now an old man himself, spoke last. My mother taught me that no matter how dark things seem, there is always hope. No matter how alone you feel, there is always someone willing to help if you are brave enough to accept it. She survived things that would have broken most people, and instead of becoming bitter, she became kinder. Instead of closing her heart, she opened it wider. That is the legacy she leaves us. Not wealth or property, but an example of how to live with courage and grace and love. The family continued to prosper for generations, always remembering the story of how Violet had made a bed in an empty church, and Owen had said, "Come home where it is warmer." They told the story to their children and grandchildren, using it as a reminder that kindness matters, that small acts of compassion can change lives, that love is always worth the risk. The church still stands, maintained by the Zeller family, and used as a community center and a reminder of where everything began. Inside, there is a plaque that tells the story of Violet and Owen, of how one cold night in 1878 brought two lonely people together and started something that would echo through generations. Sometimes, on winter nights when snow falls soft and deep, people say you can see two figures standing in the church, holding hands and looking at each other with the kind of love that transcends death. The locals say it is Violet and Owen, still together even in the afterlife, still grateful for the moment they found each other in an empty church on a cold December night. The ranch continues to operate to this day, passed down through generations of Zellers, each one adding their own chapter to the family story. But they all know that it started with a woman brave enough to keep going when everything seemed hopeless, and a man kind enough to offer help when it was needed most. It started with a makeshift bed in an abandoned church and an invitation to come home where it was warmer. It started with love. And in the end, that is all any of us really need: a place to call home, someone to share it with, and the courage to say yes when love comes calling, even when we are scared, even when we have every reason not to trust. Violet and Owen taught their family that lesson, and it is one that will continue to be passed down for as long as the Zeller name endures. The story of their love became legend in Idaho territory, told and retold until it took on the weight of myth. But to those who knew them, who loved them, who learned from them, it was simply the truth. Two people found each other when they needed each other most, and they built a life together that mattered. They loved fiercely and honestly. They raised good children. They helped their community, and they never forgot where they came from or how lucky they were to have found each other. That cold December night when Violet made a bed in an empty church, she thought her story was ending, but it was really just beginning. And when Owen walked through those church doors and saw her there, stubborn and scared and trying so hard to survive, he thought he was just doing his duty, honoring his mother's memory by checking on an old building. But really, he was walking toward his future, toward the love that would define the rest of his life. They saved each other that night in all the ways that matter, and they continued to save each other every day for the rest of their lives, through kindness and patience and the daily choice to love, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Their story is a reminder that our darkest moments can lead to our greatest joys, that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, that love is always worth the risk. It is a reminder to be kind to strangers, because you never know whose life you might change. It is a reminder that we all need help sometimes, and there is no shame in accepting it. Most of all, it is a reminder that home is not a place, but a person, that love can heal even the deepest wounds, and that sometimes the best thing you can say to someone who is lost and alone is simply this: come home where it is warmer. Come home where you are loved. Come home where you belong. Violet found her home in Owen, and he found his in her, and together they built something that lasted long after they were gone. Their love story became the foundation for generations of Zellers, a touchstone they could always return to when times were hard, a reminder of what really matters in life. And so the story ends where it began, in an old church on a snowy hillside, where two souls found each other and changed each other's lives forever, where a woman made a bed in her desperation and a man offered shelter in his compassion, and together they discovered that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can create the greatest love stories, where fear gave way to trust, loneliness gave way to companionship, and despair gave way to hope that bloomed into a joy that lasted a lifetime. This is their story, the story of Violet and Owen Zeller, and it is a love story for the ages. It began with a cold night and an empty church and an invitation to come home, and it ended decades later with a family that stretched across the territory, a legacy of kindness and courage, and a love that never died. It is a story that deserves to be remembered, to be told and retold, to inspire others to be brave enough to run when they need to, kind enough to help when they can, and open enough to love when the opportunity presents itself. They lived, they loved, they built something beautiful together, and their story continues in the hearts of everyone they touched. What more could anyone ask for than that?